mining sector, just one example, losing 100 billion rand in profit this year, and contributing to that loss is rail constraints. Rail operations also continue to be unreliable for the transportation and logistics sectors. Railway expert and researcher for the Brenthurst Foundation David Williams joins us now for more as we continue our focus today about Transnet's crumbling or failing rail infrastructure. David, good afternoon. Welcome. You had a comment there from Davy Road that maybe the private sector should come in to help to really sort out Transnet's problems. Is that the way to go, David?
It could be the way to go, but I think everyone thinks it's a magic wand. And I mean, one thinks that there might be two ways of doing this. The industries affected, like mining, I mean, they really have been hit. Rail is essential for cargoes that are heavy and high volume. Coal, minerals, timber, liquid fuels, those are ideal for rail. And Transnet just hasn't been able to get the minerals to the ports. So it may be in the interests of those industries, the mining industry, to actually come in as a private investor, not because they are railway experts, but because they want to help get their own cargoes to the port. The other possibility is that you get a rail operator, and there are private rail operators in and around South Africa, but then they are obviously in it for the profit motive, simply in terms of operating trains, and they would need an incentive to get in. And so far, there's been very little progress on this. The right noises have been made. Government has said, yes, we would like to get private sector involvement, but it seems very bureaucratic. And there's got to be long-term incentives for operators to get involved. There have been attempts before at this, and it's not easy to do.
Is it to get the right investments? Is it to maintain and secure our lines?
Well, I think what's happened is that the network has been run into the ground, and it's not as if it's a highly functioning network that can now be shared with private investors. Any private investment is going to have to help fix things in terms of signaling, infrastructure, track, and so on. A lot of these tracks have been neglected for a long time. The locomotives are in disrepair. Many of them don't have spares. So it's a big job to do this. It will need a lot of money. It will need a lot of capital. But I'm thinking of about 20 years ago, the Eastern Cape took over a branch line. So that was a kind of mini privatization within the state. The line from East London, Amabele to Mthatha, which is about 270 kilometers, closed by the old Spoornet, and the Eastern Cape government took it over, rehabilitated the line, and actually started running passenger trains again. So it looked as if it could be done. Several hundred million rand was spent. That service no longer exists because there wasn't enough money to keep subsidizing it. And they spent a fortune on rehabilitating the track, which had been closed for a couple of years. So, yes, one would like this to happen, but it's not going to happen quickly, and I think the mining industry is now desperate.
What would Transnet have to do to convince and persuade mining sector to participate? Apparently, they've been struggling to convince the private sector to participate in the auction that they've had of available assets or rail stocks, rail slots.
Yeah, they had an auction for, in particular, the Kroonstad East London line, and there were only 2 bidders, I think, out of 20 that they were hoping for. And some kind of concession was awarded. Whether that's actually happening or not, I don't know. So what private investors would want is, firstly, a long-term certainty that they will get some kind of return. So they need assurance that they can build for the future. And I think the initial contracts that Transnet offered were like 2 years, which is not nearly enough for projects like this. Secondly, they will want to deal with people in Transnet who know the railways, who know what's happening. And at the high levels, as we've seen recently, the top executives parachuted in from other sectors, maybe not talented, educated, experienced in other sectors, but not in rail. And it'd be rather like asking someone who's never been in a hospital to go and run one. Where do you start if you have no experience of the ground level operations? And I think the third thing they would want is quick decision making. So you don't want to go through endless bureaucratic and political approval processes in order to get something going. And I think that is as much the frustration as anything.
Yeah, just to make sure that you enable and facilitate any any participation. I mean, the mining sector, I've mentioned the figure there in my introduction, David, to you, losing about 100 billion rand in profit just this year. One would guess this logistics center as well is suffering a lot. I mean, the other day I drove up down to Maputo on the N4. As you get closer and closer to Komatipoort after Hectorspruit, there are long queues, kilometers and kilometers of trucks that are taking on goods that should be on the rails.
That's right. And as I say, obviously everyone agrees that we want to get these goods back on rail. I mean, if you take the Durban-Johannesburg corridor, which is the key economic corridor of the country, I mean, Johannesburg is in a strange place. Most of the big cities in the world are on the sea or on rivers. Johannesburg isn't because of the gold. So to get to the sea, we've got to travel 600 kilometers. And that corridor historically has been the lifeblood of the economy for exports and trade and so on. Obviously, other ports important too, but that's the main one. In the 1960s, that railway line was carrying 100 trains a day. And now it's carrying 4 or 5, according to the people who watch these things down in KZN. So the capacity is so low, it's going to take a long time to rebuild it.
Yeah, no, David, it's a tough time indeed, and somebody has to move fast and faster and make the right decisions.
Just one other thing there,
yes,
just
David?
to say is that a lot of this problem is not Transnet, and Transnet and Eskom have said repeatedly that the crime that they are subjected to, cable theft, vandalism, and so on, is far bigger than they can cope with. Portia Derby, the outgoing CEO of Transnet, mentioned that in the 22-23 financial year, 1,500 kilometers of cable. That's the distance from Johannesburg to Cape Town of cable stolen. And Transnet cannot sort out this rampant crime on its own.
It needs the police to support it in its efforts as well. Thank you very much. David Williams, a railway expert, is also a researcher with the Brenthurst Foundation. Now,